But like summarily, what we like to talk about here and what got us into this show in the first place is just that it feels like the world forgot about a bunch of stuff. And we're slowly in this process of rediscovering a bunch of stuff again that we kind of already should have known. And I think personally, and I don't want to speak for Tom, but I'm super interested when people sort of discover these things again, because everyone's discovery story is a little different. And I know it helps me understand my continual evolution every time I get to talk to somebody else who's kind of gone through this. And you kind of pick and choose. You take a little bit of this story, a little bit of that story, and kind of like pieces of clay, kind of make your own thing. And so that's what I'm psyched to get into today. And I don't want to speak for Tom, but
my whole career has been going back to classics. But yeah, Lenerd, why don't we start with a little bit about you, how you came to do what you're doing now, and we'll talk a little bit about what you're doing now.
So to just give a bit of background, previous life or before I was 10 years ago very much in the business corporate world and CEO of insurance company in Cape Town, South Africa.
Insurance company.
Yeah.
Huh? So not just corporate, but like the super exciting corporate.
Yeah.
Was this health insurance, or do you guys have socialized medicine there?
We actually had, it was mainly car insurance and then life insurance, but it was direct. Like the middleman. We were the Mavericks, the new guys on the block, 20, 30 years ago. We started, very much South Africa was on the forefront of direct insurance in the early 90s. When I joined this, I was a young guy, and I worked with this guys, and I ended up in the UK also in the 90s for 5 years. Super interesting, So we cut out the broker, the middleman, so the client could go directly to the company. So we were the bad guy in the industry.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
It was a lot of fun. We were the Mavericks, we were out of the box, and I enjoyed that. And so I had a lot of fun with that. From the 90s to around about 2012, 13, and then I suppose I just got, I would say partly a little bit bored, but also an internal almost awakening happening with me. I don't know what it was then, but I just one day walked into the office and I was like, hey man, I shouldn't be here anymore. And it was pretty confusing because it didn't make any sense, but I just felt I should be doing something different. And that was quite a strange feeling, so I didn't understand it. So I distracted myself with a lot of sex and drugs and jacuzzis for 4 or 5 years. Listen to the internal voice, and it was a lot of fun, but it was also a deep, dark, journey. Dark night journey of the soul. And eventually in 2012, 2013, I decided, I need to explore this. I resigned, sold and gave away everything, bought a backpack and a one-way ticket to Lima in Peru in South America. And that started this journey, started the journey of 5 years around the world. I got seriously sick in South America with parasites, and then I just found other medicines. The antibiotics didn't work, so I went into a whole journey of awakening. And for the next 5 years, I was all around the world, and from a lot of workshops, a lot of explorations. Came back in South Africa 2018, wrote a book called Jump, an Epic Soul and Sex Adventure. Got published here in South Africa. It's in the bookstores and also internationally available. And and out of the book, basically, people were starting to ask me, wow, man, this is a fascinating journey. Can you share some of the learnings? And basically out of that, I started, working with people, mentorship, doing some workshops, and you could call it in the spirituality, sexuality space, so really working with, big part of it is also working with men now and men's sexuality. Interesting. From insurance.
I find it funny. You're the second person that a viral or bacterial infection has caused sexual journey of some kind. It's like crazy that is there some kind of like unknown connection between a parasite infection and a sexual issue? I'm like, it's just funny. I'm laughing because we had a porn addiction therapist on who she got
God, she ate like bad
mussels.
Oyster.
Bad smoked oyster. It put a 16mm lesion on her brain.
Wow.
And she ended up having hypersexuality disorder for like years.
Oh.
And it was like this, and now she's a porn addiction therapist. Actually, she's coming back on the show because she's also an NLP therapist. So she's coming back on to talk about NLP.
Yeah.
But her journey started with this massively fucked up viral or bacterial
injury.
infection. Yeah, it was crazy. Like, and like, it's just odd to hear you say the same thing. I'm like, oh my God, are we having this? It's a very similar starting point here.
Oh, it seems real funny because you hear a lot in various religious traditions. There is always this like traumatic event that seems to be this catalyst, like this, like, you Lenerd, you mentioned Dark Night of the Soul, but almost like this, hey, you got hit by lightning kind of thing too. There was this definitive mark of like something happened to me and then there was another shift,
That's right. No, exactly, Tom. And yeah, I love what you're saying, Matt. And if I have to really dig deep and really think about it, maybe those days in Cape Town, just to paint the picture, from a Friday to a Monday morning, I would basically just me and 2-3 women at my house was like on Clifton Beach there, and we would have sex basically for 70 hours and taking some, concoctions to keep us awake, in terms of MDMA and cocaine and stuff. And it's super interesting, that maybe this crazy time. And then I arrived in South America, had the parasites, and then I also had a 2-year period of celibacy. And I actually thought about it the other day with also that crazy sexuality time that I had in Cape Town, when I was in South America, not kind of invited the parasites in a way, these things, physical thing happens also when we maybe in a mental or soul space there. I think there's something there that when you mentioned that, Matt, that I think that there might be something like that. And then specifically, yes, having that parasites and then trying to get rid of it is definitely, as you mentioned there, Tom, is like definitely then started this whole deep inner journey because I had to get better. And I took 4 antibiotics and it didn't work. And then I was really open to try anything in the energy world. And, left brain guy like me, I studied law, business, all of that. I was energy, I didn't really get it. And then when I was so sick in South America, I was open to doing a lot of energy work because I wanted to save my life. And that then opened this whole new world for me.
And I think we've heard versions of this story a lot with other people too, where it's like, we almost have this mental roadblock around healing modalities that are not Western based, right? It's like, oh, I'm messed up. There's got to be a pill or a shot or something I can take. And so to say to somebody, hey, you know what? You're probably going to help you a lot is meditate for 20 minutes a day for the rest of your life. And they're like, what? I don't want to do that. That sounds crazy.
And no one like, will do that until they're knocked on their ass, you know?
Right. And it's like, and I always am reminded of the Dalai Lama quote where they're like, hey, with your schedule being so busy, like, do you find it hard to meditate for an hour a day? He goes, well, if I ever found it hard to meditate for an hour a day, it's time to meditate for 2. And people hear that and they're like, that guy's just obviously fucking crazy. And I'm like, actually, no, it's like a acute awareness of everything inside of him. He's like, no, if I'm at a place where this doesn't make sense, then the cure is to do more of this, like not like shine away from it. And candidly, I struggle with that, like 20 minutes a day. There's some days where I'm like, oh, I don't want to do this, but my health goes to shit if I don't, right? Like, and it's like, that took me forever to figure out. Right. So we definitely have heard this. And I know, Tom, in your clinician work, you see this all the time, but.
Yeah. I normally it's funny because like when we see it in our clinic, it's chronic illness. Right. And those people have become experts in a way for themselves, right? They're not out there teaching other people, maybe not yet, but they need to figure out how to live their life with this chronic condition, and it alters everything, right? In some ways, it's very cathartic where they're coming out. Yes, it's a horrible experience, but they're coming out the other side with more wisdom, more compassion, more ability to interact with others. Like they've traded that. Like, Lenerd, you kind of mentioned this, like almost like you invited the parasite in. Like, I didn't know what I needed, and there was this space there, right? This is a shiatsu thing from Masunaga Sensei, right? He talks about us as a human being as a perfect circle, and we go through life and we get trauma, right? And that circle gets dented, and unless we do the work to push that circle back out, something sticks in there.
Yeah.
and then not only do we have to go through the process of removing that thing that's stuck in there, but we also then have to repair the circle.
Yeah, speaking of that, actually, I picked up on a couple of things you said, Lenerd. Like you said, 2 years of celibacy. Does like that kind of stuff come out of this trauma? Like how did you get to that spot?
In terms of the celibacy, it was then I just started interacting in South America with when I was, and South America got beautiful women. I love beautiful women. I was in Medellin in Colombia, gorgeous, beautiful women around, but I just had this same soul voice also saying, don't interact. So I would talk to them, but I wouldn't go into the physical space. It was just this inner voice that basically said to me, it was almost difficult. When I'm with someone, I would by accident spill some coffee on them, or I would do something stupid so that it didn't go there. And it was really interesting because it allowed me to do that deep inner journey. Otherwise, it'd be so easy just to connect with the woman there and spend a lot of time with her. So the celibacy wasn't a rational thing. It just developed out of the day-to-day thing where I just felt I shouldn't engage. I know it's difficult to articulate, to understand, but it was almost like this inner voice kind of taking me there. It makes any sense.
No, that does. And then it's funny. I find myself the older I get doing things that I don't really understand why I'm doing them. They just feel right. Like I'll just eat differently for a couple weeks, not because I'm trying a new fad diet or anything, but just because I have this calling to do something different. It's like, I can't articulate it. Like, I'm wondering, does that sort of
like an intuitive?
Yeah. Like my brain's just I don't know why you want to do this, but we need you to just, eat broccoli all week. And that's, and I'm using something stupid, but I'll just get into a rut for something that has no explanation. It just feels like the right thing to do. It sounds like kind of like that's happening with you at a certain point.
No, 100%. That's nicely articulated. It was just like in the situation, I just felt intuitively not to interact, and which was quite different for my old self in a way, because normally I would. And that was actually very confusing because it wasn't a rational thing. I was like, why am I acting like this? So it was an interesting time.
So are you at a place now where you kind of look back on the sex, drugs, and rock and roll phase and kind of do you look back on it? I don't want to say with regret, but do you kind of look back on it as a foreign thing, or is it just a building block in your journey and you kind of incorporate the whole thing?
Very much a building block. I must say, I live in that way now. Yeah, there's not many things probably almost nothing I regret, I think. I just see it as a building block. It was almost like, it was meant to be. It was part of my journey. And it brought me to the other learnings. And in that experiences, I also, there were some dark nights of the soul, obviously, in that time. But it also, I have to be authentic and honest. I also had beautiful experiences, that I had schoolboy fantasies of being, like threesomes with two beautiful women, So I'm not putting that in a bad box of this was bad and now I'm being a good guy. It was really part of my journey. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. And I think, it's funny. I grew up, in the 80s, just Tom and I are the same. And in the 80s, drugs were bad and church was good. And you had this weird construct of what the world was. And I was also that little kid who was like, dude, I'm listening to Motley Crue and Guns N' Roses on the radio. I'm like, these guys are just doing lines of coke off of these girls' boobs. And it's awesome. I want to do that when I get older. And then you're like, yeah, and you just, I don't know. I didn't get to that point ever, but sometimes you look back, you're like, the 15-year-old in me would love what just happened. But the, 25-year-old in me that just did that is like, like I'm like, I don't, not quite as, and so like I have always, funny enough, had like this, like, there's got to be a better fantasy to have than the ones I was having. And I think that's what my current journey is like, what are better fantasies to have? Like, now like doing like a 24-hour meditation seems like a aspirational goal for me now. Like, and like my 15-year-old self would be like, the fuck are you talking about, man? Like, what?
No,
Yeah,
totally relate. For me now, just to deeply connect with someone and have that deep heart connection with my partner, with a woman, that's kind of in a way.
No, and actually, I wanted to get to this with you, but you like teed it up perfectly. So like taking a little bit of a left turn here, but like Tom and I just got a book recommendation from someone that we read called Man Uncivilized, and like there's been another book, Way of the Superior Man, and these themes have been around for a while, right? Like they're not necessarily new, but I want to hear more about like how you ended up at that place, because I do think, and let's just use a super, bougie word here, but the more civilized man seems to be defined more and more as a man who could connect to those pieces in an efficient and productive way versus over indexing on this masculine energy that we sort of
and we also hear this term toxic masculinity.
Correct,
being, that's very in the forefront too. And it sounds like that 80s hookers and blow kind of mentality was part of that toxic masculinity, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing. And I think, we should all be evolving, but it seems like that is now coming to the forefront in men's mental health, let's say, or spiritual health, whatever you want to call it.
Which again, and I'll leave it with you with the rest of this, but I think that if your mental health is in line, your sexual health more than likely follows suit. I would guess would be my guess.
Yeah, no, just what David Data's Way of the Superior Man. I just love his work. One of the books you mentioned there, and the polarity in relationships and the masculine, feminine energies, and that's one of my passions. Is what does modern masculinity mean? And especially for the young guys. We grew up in the 80s, and I think it, in the current environment, there's some challenges for us, but I just feel the young guys that arrive now, the challenges are even more for them. They're in a way quite confused about their place in the world, because they walk in here, and as they arrive, they hear toxic masculinity, and it's so easy for them to go into the place of like, masculinity is wrong, and let me not be too masculine, and I see that so often, guys, and that that really breaks my heart, and because I think it's a balance, I really believe that yes, we want to be like David Data says, be in our masculine, feminine energies, and really integrate it. For me, part of these workshops I did around the world, one was called Spiritual Sexual Shamanism, which was a 7-day residential 7-day workshop, and it was a lot about also integrating your masculine and feminine energies, and then dancing with it. Know what is your masculine and what is your feminine, and whether you're born in a man or a woman body, you've got both, and then starting to realize that. So for me, that is super, super important. I think for us as modern men to be in that feminine energies. But then I also believe, and I've been on a beautiful workshop actually a weekend ago. I first may have come across it. That's been around for ages. I actually started in the States, called the Mankind Project. And it was very much also about, but don't forget this wild man inside. So for me, masculinity is, that's what I love talking about it, because I think so many men, especially the young men, need to hear that there's, this masculine, feminine energy integration, but that wild primal life force energy, which is your wild man, don't disconnect from that, be confident and unapologetic about that.
Yeah, that actually came up. That was a recurring topic in that book, Man Uncivilized, that I actually just read that a couple months ago. And that topic comes up a lot. And I've been studying jiu-jitsu for 20 something years now, and, very advanced down that path. And a lot of of how that works is sort of this yin yang situation, right? Where you're like, here's the feminine or soft side of me, here's the masculine or hard side of me. And every physical interaction is sort of an interplay of that, even in the same fight. You know, sometimes you get delicate and sometimes you get real hard, and and knowing how to balance those things and when to introduce one versus the other is part of the art form, right? The arts part of martial arts, right? Like, and so, like I said, these themes are there, but I guess change the question a little bit. What do you think it is about the current younger man? I mean, you and the three of us could all be like, yeah, when I was a kid, I just wanted to jerk off and listen to rock and go hang out with my friends and stuff. But I do agree with you. I just don't know why I agree with you that
we're supposed to stop doing that at some age.
Yeah. What is that? That was the first question we asked the porn edition. Like, before we get going,
how much porn is too much?
Are we talking about? But I agree with you, but I don't know why. Why do you think that the current young men have a different problem to solve than we had when we were that age? Like, do you have any kind of insight on that?
I think because there's so much more information available for them about dropping into their feminine parts, you know, the yin yang thing. I mean, in the 80s, when people were to come to us, you know, or to me, then talking about my masculine, feminine energies, I would go like, what the fuck are you talking about? I mean, it wouldn't, you know, this wasn't part of our world then. But, you know, these guys now, you know, they grew up with that. It's very much in their space, and they really do drop into their feminine, generally speaking. Obviously, it's a generalization. But I think what I find, and maybe it's more in the spirituality circles, maybe it's also defined. In the spirituality circles, I often find the men get so, the younger men, so into their feminine that they almost lose a little bit of the edge of the masculine. And I even have some women coming to me and say, yes, man, it's so beautiful, these guys getting into their feminine, and these are the same young women in their 20s, but hey, man, where's my man? I want to feel that man, you know, that there's resistance, you know, I don't want to push anymore, just go, you know, it's push and then, here's a nice, firm solidness. I think, generally speaking, that might be a challenge, and that's maybe in the spiritual circles, maybe more. But then maybe mainstream, let me think about it. There's also, I think, you know, the Me Too campaign and all those. I mean, and obviously there's so much value in all of that happened, and it was good for that to come up. But then there's also, you know, there's always a backlash. There's always a pendulum that swing, you know.
The pendulum goes too far one way.
We're never in the middle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think I actually personally don't like this word toxic masculinity because, you know, because it almost sounds as if all masculinity is toxic. You know, the way it goes together, I really don't.
That's the drum that's getting beat now. Is like, I think we messed up by coining this phrase, right? Like we could have called it something different. Like, but the vocabulary itself is pendulum too far,
exactly,
kind of thing, right? Like it
exactly, Matt. You know, calling it the immature masculine or unhealthy masculine. That's for me so much.
Unregulated or something like that.
Unregulated masculinity. Something like that.
Exactly, because if you call it unhealthy, you can know, okay, that means there is a healthy masculinity. But if you call something toxic, you know, it's like, fuck, okay, masculinity is toxic.
All of it. Burn it all down. Yeah.
Well, what's interesting too, and we've had this conversation a lot, and I think it was touched in one of those books. I can't remember, but when you pull somebody in or out of their counterpart too much, that creates like this cognitive dissonance about like, all right, like if you pull a woman too far out of her feminine and force her to in her masculine, let's say you're in a relationship and like you're too far into your feminine, so you're providing no masculine in the relationship, then that causes the feminine to be like, hey man, I'm spending too much time over here. Like I this isn't working for me. And like, they don't know how to articulate it.
Yeah.
But eventually a lot of relationships do tend to dissolve when you pull somebody too far out. And that works both ways, but we're talking about guys right now. So we'll just, you know, when a guy's too far in touch, and we've seen this happen like a bunch of different ways. And that's why I said this topic is super fascinating, because at one point I don't know, like, were we ever, like, I don't know. I look back at caveman and my picture is like, it's just hyper masculinity. Like there's no,
well, I mean, we're going on a, like, what are we basing that off of? We don't have really any case studies there. Cartoons and, the Flintstones and shit like that.
Yeah. But I guess what I'm curious about is like, have we sort of like, are we on a path to discovering like the real balance here? Because I feel like balance is the only, not to get too woo-woo here, but to me, balance is the only cure for every problem that we have right now, right? Like you look at any problem, you peel it back. It usually comes back to metacognitive failures or imbalance, right? Like, so it's, and I don't want to like overly reduce things, but almost everything I've peeled back in the last couple years, especially doing this show where we're looking at things more intensely. Oh, that guy's out of balance. That girl's not thinking about it right. This is like, it's always like this. These are recurring nightmares in problems, right?
Sure. I think balance is a big part. I agree with you, but and I think there's also the aspects in each of those categories or energies, both masculine and both feminine, that are, call it immature and mature, or unhealthy and healthy. And maybe to be like demystifying things, maybe just to take an example. So maybe in masculine would be, so let's say the mature masculine, I think, would be present, presence and loving, but like firm right there and right here, and be present with someone. The immature masculine would be walking around and shouting and screaming and like, that type of thing, showing the strength in an immature way. And then the feminine side, the mature feminine would be nurturing and caring. And the immature feminine would be manipulative, and trying to do things in a manipulative way. So
that's interesting.
So there's the balance, but then there's also for all of us to, and I mean, it's a journey, it's always a journey. It's not like, we're not enlightened here, very few on the planet here enlightened, I suppose, Dalai Lama, maybe a few other guys, but I think it's that also. I think it's that deep inner journey of getting to those healthy, mature parts of ourselves in both energies. That's it.
So, no, that makes total sense. So like when you get,
absolutely, yeah.
When you get from, let's just summarize up to here as, let's say, the soft skills of this, right? Like the spiritual side of it. But where does that transition into the more tactical skills? Like you talk about semen retention and stuff like that, but a little bit more of the physical side. Like where does that bridge get built? Because I that's something that, like, you've seen, like the orgasm without ejaculation. Like, I'll be honest with you, I'm 47 and I tried that shit when I was in my 20s. I have never gotten it to work. I tried it again in my 30s. I tried it again in my early 40s. I'm like, all right, maybe I'm just not cut out for this. I don't know. But I've tried it a lot because it's very curious concept.
And it's a theme that comes up too quite a bit, right? Monarchia and, the Tao of sexuality, and he wrote a whole bunch of books on that.
Yeah. So like,
the multi-orgasmic man, those kind of things. Yeah,
exactly. Monarchia. Yeah, that's exactly. He wrote that book, and it's a it's a lot of that space, and that's true. I actually do 21-day journeys with guys. I specifically on that, to get into not ejaculate for 21 days, not watching porn for 21 days, help them, self-pleasuring in different ways, having morning routines, and, rather than looking at the phone directly, I'm just giving some quick pointers on it. And I believe a big part of that is self-love, and it's also, it's not necessarily getting to the point of orgasm without ejaculation. That's one part of it. The other part of it is just the awareness of our ejaculation. So what I'm passionate about is that to realize that if we, for example, ejaculate every day, just to be aware of what your energy in your body is, and let's say maybe you do every 7 days, then what effect does it have in your body? And I believe finding that good ejaculation frequency period for each of us individually, whether we orgasm or not, that's for me almost the starting point. is that we as men don't, and I'm talking generally now, because generally speaking, majority of men don't know that with ejaculation we lose so much energy, and that, to ejaculate 3-4 times a day from age 14 to 60, maybe that's not optimum, and that you can, as you get a bit older, ejaculate less and have more life force energy, and that you can actually make love with someone without ejaculating, and you can self pleasure but not bring yourself to ejaculation, but maybe a few days later when you make love, ejaculate. I think that those things are, for me, I'm quite passionate about.
So was this because you talked about being in South America, and a lot of the concepts you're talking about sound like, I mean, when I was in acupuncture school, we had this idea of, like, they had these age ranges, right? Men are on a certain 8-year cycle, women are on a 7-year cycle, but by the time every decade you aged as a male, the ejaculation had to be less frequent, right, to hang on to that life force. Yeah, that was the concept. Did these concepts kind of come from there, or did they come from a more South American tradition for you?
I've come across it in a bit in the Taoism, the Tao, China, group of physicians like 2,500 years ago that practice these things. Now, I've got this thick book about it, and it's so beautiful the way they write it. It's such a beautiful, innocent way.
Be careful, you're going to get Tom talking for like 3 hours on Taoism.
Hold on, let me go get my collection.
Yeah, hold on.
Beautiful. Okay, so you know what I'm talking. It's just such a beautiful way they talk about sexuality, because it wasn't so much conditioning those days, So for me, so I only really recently read those books. I mean, my journey is pretty crazy. It started happening with me 20 years ago. Before I even heard the word Tantra, I started having this stuff happening to me, orgasm without ejaculation, and then the Clifton days, the party days, with using a lot of drugs. And the disclaimer, I'm not advising people to use drugs, but with the drugs and the plant medicine, it became even more enhanced. So for me, it's an embodied thing. It happened for me, just over time. So I kind of embodying this. But the reading the Taoist things and a lot of this stuff, I totally. So there's rough guidelines. They do say look at every individual, but those rough guidelines kind of make sense for me, because when you're 20, 30, 40, 50, definitely, your body gets older, testosterone drops. So I think there's a lot of wisdom in those broad guidelines.
Mm-hmm.
And do you view this as sort of a very much like an N of one situation? Like, cause like, I know for me personally, like masturbation has always had like sort of multi-functions, right? Like sometimes it's just cause I'm horny, but other times it's cause I'm like stressed out and like I feel great to just ejaculate. Like it's not like a one size fits all thing. So Tom and I were saying, we're like, what if I'm really stressed out and jerking off once a day for a month feels like the right thing to do? Like, am I basically dying 10 years early because I just lost all the life force?
Well, but it's also like, I mean, we could say that about almost any practice, right? And I think Lenerd was kind of hinting at what the classics were saying is, it's not just, this rigid guideline. It's like, how are we feeling and where are we at with our own personal health and our own, mindset and our even our rationale for doing what we're doing,
Right.
Sure. And I'm also so cautious to almost be prescriptive on these things, and to shaming anyone, So there.
I can see that.
Yeah, so therefore one wants to ejaculate every day for a month. Fuck, I'm the last person that's going to say, "Wow, that's a bad thing, and you shouldn't do that."
Right.
I really believe, there's so much shame and guilt around sexuality in any event. So I really very much open with it. What I'm passionate about is sharing. What always I find super scary is the term, you don't know what you don't know. And for me, it's more bringing the knowledge to people and not necessarily persuading or not persuading anyone at all to follow something, but just to say, hey guys, do you know this thing exists? And I invite you to maybe for 7-10 days not ejaculate and see what happens to your body, and then play around with it. But not to say to everyone, hey guys, you must practice ejaculation choice. So I love that openness, and But I just love the fact of bringing the information forward, because it's insane. I know in the last 4 or 5 years on the internet, it's gone much more traction, but generally speaking, I think 98% of the population on this planet don't even know about what we're talking about now.
Yeah.
No, and that's the problem that we find all the time, right? Like when COVID hit, right? We had this whole conversation about vitamin D, and I know it's not related to what we're talking about, but I think it's illustrative, right?
Sure.
Tom and I are vitamin D supplement nerds in general, right? Like I've been taking vitamin D forever. And we find out that COVID does not affect people who are vitamin D ample the same way as it does who are deficient, right?
Oh, well.
And Tom was like, well, you can't wag your finger at people for not knowing this and getting sick accidentally because like they just didn't know. And I'm like, yeah, but like we know, not because I have some like obsession with vitamin D, but because we are exuberant learners of self-care, and therefore it's built into the lattice work that informs my life as a whole.
Yeah.
And so to your point, like, one of the things I love about doing the show is I learn about stuff that wasn't part of that lattice work, right? So I could just build on.
Mm-hmm.
But it takes almost militaristic volition to learn this stuff, because you have to like go way out of your way sometimes to get this knowledge, because
Sure.
it's not just growing on trees, right? You can't just,
Sure.
If I wanted information on Viagra, I could literally get hundreds and hundreds of pages in 5 seconds on Google of very credible science around Viagra. I can't do that with vitamin D dosing, right? Like that's a really hard topic. And God, I'm not even talking about shit that's really hard, like men's sexual health. God forbid you open that can of worms,
Sure.
And then you go down the woo-woo rabbit hole a little bit, and you got people trying to sell you all kinds of wacky shit to solve it, right? And so like that's where I'm kind of like, I love learning about it, but like how do you make the information available in a non-persuasive way? And it sounds like you're doing a great job of it, but like I love the way you use the words, because you're right. As soon as you transition to persuasion, it rolls downhill, right? Like now you're trying to like move somebody's energy, and like that's
exactly. And the person can feel it, and why do you want to persuade?
100%.
No, and then I believe to pass the power, even in workshops, give the power back to people in a circle, even if you're holding the space, that's it's, put the power with a person, definitely. And to your point about the vitamin D and that, but that's why it's so important what you guys are doing and this type of thing that's happening now, where people just have these podcasts and share this experience, what before wasn't available in mainstream media,
You've sort of, I don't want to say productized because that's got like a negative stigma here, but you've turned this into an instructional sort of framework. Like, talk to me a little bit about what you do there and how that works. I'm curious what you do.
Matt, I found that this this 21-day journey is like it's really cool, because I could do it. You can do it as a self-study. You can do it as a group of 20, 30 guys, or a one-on-one basis with. So we basically do 21 days, and then with every 7 days a Zoom call if it's a group journey with the 20, 30 guys. And basically, to take the basis of it is to take men to 21 days, or as long as they can in the 21 days of not ejaculating. And by doing,
what's the magic in, I just real quick, sorry, what's the 21-day thing about? You've said that a couple times. What's magic about this
21 days seem to be a lot of people around talk about, and to set a habit and to set a practice is kind of a magical number, 21. If you want to set
just setting habits.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And I could have gone with like maybe 10 days or 30 days, but I thought 21 day, it's kind of a cool thing, plus the habit thing. So that's in essence why. And it's like the little videos on a daily basis of the 21 days, and then every week a Zoom call on it. And the big thing is now you're part of a group of guys. You're being witnessed, you're being held accountable. It just makes it easier. You can watch all the video stuff on it on YouTube, which is beautiful, but are you actually going to do it? And I think on the same point what you raised earlier is inviting guys to experiment with it and actually try this period, or and maybe some guys can only 12 days, and that's okay. You're not getting shamed or kicked off the course or anything.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
but it really gives you, and I mean, Matt, it's amazing what the guys come up with. I know it sounds woo-woo, but
no, not at all. Actually, I was going to ask you, like, paint me a little picture of, like, I mean, obviously worst case scenario, they're like, hey, thanks for the thought experiment. It didn't, I don't have like a lot to say about it, but what's like the best case scenario? Like what's the other side of that spectrum?
yes, I mean, I get guys coming out and say that I've got one guy of 27 now, and I'm doing like one-on-one with him, and he says he feels like Superman. He says he's playing this.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, he's playing squash there at the gym, and all the women walk past and just look at him, So there's basically what happens. You start glowing and radiating. So you start,
interesting.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So I get, and there's so many testimonials on it, or guys' records on it. The guys actually say, there's one guy in Prague, he was saying people, you got like work collaborations happening. It's like magic, and obviously this is not a guarantee that you're now going to, this is going to happen to you, but just some examples of where the one chap was saying, I'm a bit shy, I don't really approach women, but I actually find women approaching me more. So energetic, there's something seems to be happening with you when you build up the life force energy in your body. And that seems to be happening for the guys after 10 days, 15 days.
That's really interesting, actually. It's funny. I don't like weight training a lot. Like, I'm not a weight training guy. It's not like my thing, right? I'm much more of a runner, but when I do weight train, I feel like for 24 hours after I come out of a good weight training session, I am taller. I have like a different energy. And again, that sounds really woo woo, but like, I definitely feel different. And maybe it's just a placebo effect. I'm not sure, but like, I present differently. I think differently. Like, everything about me shifts. Right. Yeah. And you might be wondering why I don't do that every day, because it sounds all positive, but like, I really don't like weight training, like, at all. So like, so it's just not like a thing I do, but what you're saying resonates with me. I'm like, look, I don't know. I've never gone, candidly. I don't think I've ever gone
since puberty
without ejaculating. I'll be honest with you, Tom. I don't have a long fucking time. Yeah. Like, yeah.
How long, if I may ask, Matt, how long you've gone? What would be the maximum? It's quite personal now, but if you're happy to say.
I'll bet you it hasn't been longer than 7 days. I'll bet you it has not been.
I would invite you to try maybe do like a 14 days or 21 days, and you don't have to do it in a course. You can just yourself, And
no, but I'll tell you, Tom, one thing you don't know about Tom and I, we're like, if we're going to try it, I'm going to fucking try it. Like, I'm going all in, right? Like, it's not, so if 21 days is sort of like the, let's see what happens number, then that would be the number, right? Like, I mean, there's no, like,
if that's the number,
like,
that's
19
the number,
isn't the same as 21, right? Like, that's,
well, it's also funny because Lenerd, I know you were doing a lot of like shamanism stuff in South America, and even some of the ceremonies I've done, they talk about the dieta, right? The diet. And part of that is abstinence. It's not just the foods you eat, right? And it's very interesting to see that.
Exactly. In the 80s, you guys talking about the 80s. I remember I watched a lot of boxing in the 80s, and the guys were saying to their fighters, don't have sex the night before the fight or a week before the fight. And I remember reading it in the newspapers a few times, and everyone, the journalists were laughing about it, and what's that about? But now it makes obviously a lot of sense, So
the reason that made sense to me, and I don't know if this is real or not, but the reason that made sense to me is because you're building up literally a testosterone base, and like, you're not letting go. And that actually makes sense, but for a completely different reason, right? Like, I'm like, okay, well, I'm about to fucking go in and try to beat the shit out of somebody.
Yeah. I mean, I love just almost this little graph, if I can draw it like that, it's like they say, I mean, obviously these are averages, but like 5 to 7 days for your body to recover all, the sperm cells and the proteins and enzymes. I mean, I think they talk like average to 300 million sperm cells at each ejaculation, and 200 proteins and vitamins, and and it's almost like you basically, that is the baseline, and you ejaculate, and it takes you the 7 days to get back to
interesting,
to the baseline again, and the guys often call that the ejaculation hangover period. That 5 to 7 days. And some guys, maybe if you're 20 years old, it may be 2 days, and if you're 70, it may be 7. But it's basically this hangover period in between. So what I find fascinating is that if you from, let's say, the age of 14 to the age of, let's say, 70 or whatever the age is, 40 or 30, always ejaculated within that 5 to 7 day period. You've always lived in the ejaculation hangover period. So you wouldn't know how your body would feel if you're out of that baseline and you come back to the zero base of your everything that's depleted coming back into your body, and then building it up a little bit. And that's why I always just invite, to say to guys, don't just take my word for it, try that and see what happens.
No, of course. So here's a question. I go 21 days, right? And like, everything's going well. Like, is that sort of like an elimination diet mentality? Like, can you return to something different after that? Like, I'm just curious, like what the thought process is, right? Like
100%. It is really to stretch most of the guys to get to their stretch. That's kind of it. And I mean, that guys, one of my latest course, the youngest guy was 22, actually a friend of my son, and the oldest guy was 70. So it just covers. It takes it to at least a 3-week period. But then at the end of that, you find off what is your. The guy at 22, he shared that he'll probably. I spoke to him the other day. He'll ejaculate like once a week, once in 5 days. He's 22 years old, so now he stretched himself, and what I invite the guys after that to keep almost a little journal and say. And to experiment and say, okay, ejaculate after 2 days, ejaculate after a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and find your rhythm. So to share from my perspective, mine is like around about 2 weeks on average. Now, sometimes it's 1 week, sometimes it's 3 weeks, but on average about 2 weeks. And I mean, I make love almost, on a daily basis or like a few times a week. But I don't ejaculate in that lovemaking, but I would then every 2 weeks. No, and I'm in my 50s, So you find your own sweet spot, and that sweet spot can change, It's as you said, how you feel.
And it's funny. I just caught myself in my own trap here. I said, I'm like, well, wait a minute. How's he having sex every day? But like, I'm like, oh, it's that non-ejaculatory sexual experience, which I'm like, all right, now it's all coming back in a full circle. You're like, all right, so that sort of really is. If you don't want to connect in an intimate way, then you kind of got to learn this skill. Like there's a tactical part of that. Like
Matt, that's true. But often when I maybe make love in that day, I don't have this massive orgasm, non-ejaculatory orgasm thing. It may just be fun. I might just be enjoying the intimacy. There's pleasure, a little bit of pleasure running my body. But it isn't. You don't have to have this mind-blowing orgasmic kind of feeling. Sometimes I have it, but what kind of starts happening in one's body is that it becomes the journey, not the destination. It becomes like wow, be in a state, and make love, and then feel these feelings. Obviously the penis feeling and the friction feeling, but also some tingling in the body, but even if it isn't there, it's still fun. It's still a beautiful, intimate experience. And then I can just lie down a bit and go get a tea together. But then, 10 minutes later, I can make love with my partner again, because I don't have that refractory period. After you ejaculate, it takes X amount of time, depending on age, to get the erection again. I think that's the beauty for me, is that you actually can have this interaction without getting to the ejaculation.
God damn it! I'm gonna now have to like kick up this experiment
Matt,
again and try to figure out how to do this again.
Last week when I pitched the Ancient Secrets of the Fountain of Youth, and we tried that, they have 5 movements. The 6th one you only do if you're going to be abstinent for a while. So I don't know if that's full abstinence or just non-ejaculatory. That's not really spelled out in the book. So that might be something interesting to try too.
Sure. Yeah, I do feel like it's like one of those Everest things for me. Like I'm like, God, if I can just like figure out how to do this. I'd love to it's like one of those things I'm almost annoyed. Like the book in the 90s that I got on it was like 30 pages long. It was like this little tiny, like almost like a leaflet. It was barely constituted as a book, but it was doing all these, what is that? Your PE muscle or whatever it is,
like they tell you to stop peeing midstream and things like
you know
that.
What I mean? Like, so correct. Like, and then one guy says, get an erection and put a wet towel over your penis and flex it up, like to try to do like literally he's like, doing push-ups with your penis. And like, there's all these different things. I mean, I think conceptually it's all very similar, but I'm like, I'm missing the how to do this. Like, I don't know the punchline, like,
yeah, Matt. And that's why I sometimes so I love Mantak Chia. He brought it to the West. He's multi-orgasmic man, but it is very clinical. I think we've moved on from like, the 80s, 70s, 80s, whatever that was written. It's very clinical, these exercises and stuff, So I think there's more chilled, more easier ways of doing this, which is not so hard. That's not like you have to do all these wet towel things and
penis push-ups.
Yeah, exactly. Where you can actually just, not ejaculate for a period, but then self-pleasure, bring yourself closer, do some breathing stuff with it, and then it starts slowly happening. And as I always say, sexuality is a very interesting thing, So if one wants to go play, okay, you guys don't have rugby, like play rugby for the Springboks or for the first team there, baseball or basketball there in the States, you don't just pitch up on day one and I'm now on the national team. You go and practice, or if you go to the gym and you want to push your body weight, you can't just do it on day one, so you have to practice. But somehow sexuality, everyone goes, no, we should just have it. But it's also practice, and so I really believe but one doesn't want to make it intimidating. I think some of those things you talk about, Matt, I think sometimes it's intimidating, the ways the guys put it. It becomes, I think it should be an ease and a flow, but then practicing it and making the practice fun. And then the more you practice, it becomes then like a sport that you can then execute.
Interesting. I do feel like it's one of those things. I mean, I've always perceived it as one of those things. You remember those stereograms where you had to like cross your eyes to see like the bird in it, or what? It's like, you can't do it until you can. And then once you can, it's like obvious. And you're like, oh, okay, that's how you do that thing. Right. Like I kind of always viewed it like that. And I'm like, I just can't cross my eyes the right way to make this thing work. You know what I mean? Like, so, but I just don't like, I think I'm fascinated and also don't like that something so fundamental to us can have such an impact. And I almost like don't want to believe it only because I can't do it or have not yet done it. You know what I'm saying? But I think it's, again, for me personally, I mean, I think it's the growing up in Catholic school, K through 12, like sexuality is like not a topic, right? Like it's like just not a,
and
not
it's
a topic
for reproduction,
sex
or
is like,
you're going to go to hell if you do
like,
anything
like,
deviant or anything like that.
Yeah. And it's,
Yeah.
I remember getting a physical when I was like 12 and my doctor, young guy, goes, so has your parents talked to you about masturbation?
Why are my pants down?
Stranger danger. Stop. Like, like, I'm like, yeah, no, like, what the fuck are you saying, man? And he's like, oh, it's totally natural. It's totally normal. I'm like, dude, stop talking about this. And meanwhile, with my adult self, I'm like, I should have leaned in on that and been like, dude, yeah, let's talk about this.
That's what happens when your nation was founded by Puritans.
But, yeah.
I also had a little bit of that at childhood. I say South Africa also a little bit conservative in the 80s, even now still, Also grew up a little bit with that, So I think all of us have, and I think that's also part of this thing, So masturbation has always happened fast and quick, So that's why you had to quickly start to catches you, and that's us. I believe that is a big part why, that you're almost. So then when you make love to last, what I always say to the guys, to last longer in bed, making love with a woman, or a man, it doesn't matter. You have to also, when you self-pleasure, when you masturbate, I say to the guys, the quickest way to get to that is to see whether you can also last 15, 20 minutes masturbating rather than the 2-3 minutes, because now you train your body to come fast, if you know what I'm saying.
Like endurance training.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
There's so much shame.
Yeah, there's this whole endurance training.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's the funny part. It does become mechanical a little bit, right? Like if you've trained yourself to go fast, you need to equally train yourself to not go fast. Right? Like there is
that's exactly.
Yeah, there's a mechanical component to that. That might weave in other things.
I really believe that. I believe that. You train for a sprint, and you're like, especially with porn. If you look at pornography, it's like sometimes a clock there that goes tick tick tick. How fast you ejaculate, and then you learn you train for the sprint, 100 meters, and then you have an encounter with a woman, and her body warms up only after 15 or 20 minutes. And now you have in a marathon interaction with a woman. You're trained as a sprinter, so.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you're like, what the hell am I doing here? Yeah, totally. So cool. So like, so I guess what sort of where are you at now? Are you really involved in the sessions with guys? Like where can we send people to you, or like how do we, like how do people sort of like tap you for your knowledge, and talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So my website is quite extensive. It's lenerdlouw.com. The spelling of that, probably it's L-E-N.
We'll put that in there for sure.
Great. It's a very specific spelling.
L-O-U-W though, but it's cool. And there was a lot going on. I was looking at the site. I'm like, man, we could talk about 100 things with this guy. I don't know which.
These journeys I do, the 21-day journeys, you can do it in groups, or we can just do one-on-one Zoom stuff with me also, where we do that course as a basis. But I also have like 3-month mentorship stuff that doesn't just cover sexuality. It covers some of the other, emotional, mental, spiritual bodies. So it's quite wide. But it mainly with men. And I mean, I didn't see that coming. It just kind of developed into that now. But so the website is there. You can pop me an email, and also very happy to have an exploratory 20-minute chat to see whether there's a match.
And I love that people like you are actually, at least the vibe what I got today is like, you're more interested in helping people actually get there. So you're like, I'll give you a half hour, like whatever. I mean,
and it also feels like
that feels more
talking
like
about your journey and how you got here, right? You went through it, right? So many people get up there and go, here's how you do this. And then if you press, they've never done it. They don't do it. They don't practice it, right? They're not, practicing what they preach, as the phrase goes.
Yes, no, exactly. Yeah, I must say, I very much this from an embodiment experience. I love talking about things that's knowledge, that experience, not just from a book. But that's also good. But it's borrowed knowledge, what you really have physically experienced, you embody, and I think the transmission with that is cool. Yes, and then to your point, there's exactly I'm at a point in my life now where I want to. In service, and it lights me up to see this transformation in people, and
I'm sure.
Yes, there's a remuneration, energy exchange, but I think there's much more money in insurance than what I did before. I want to I'll probably go back.
Isn't that weird?
Yeah.
Like I could make more money selling insurance than I can about talking about leading a healthier lifestyle. Like that
that always cracks me up because I go to the office, I love what I do, and then
totally,
I'm like, dude, if I just got a 9 to 5 when I got out of college, I'd be somewhere else right now, But I guess it's definitely not about that. It's about living the life that has a purpose and meaning, and
Otherwise, you get and you have all the stuff in the world, and you go, I've got the corner office, I've got the car, the house, the goal. But then, wow, I mean, what does this mean, So, and then you may be at the end of your life. So,
I had a mentor a couple of years back ask me a question, and that like kind of really shook me. But he goes, the moment before your father ejaculated into your mother and you chose to take life, what made you choose to take this life? And I was like, well, that's pretty fucking incredibly deep. And he's like, until you know the answer to that question, you're just bumping into walls. You're not really living. You're just existing.
I love that.
And it's like kind of haunted me, this question, ever since. And it sort of like shapes a lot of what I do now. Is like, hey man, what am I doing that thing that I chose to take form on today or not? And some days I am, some days I'm not. But the days that I'm not,
you're just going
like
through the
hollow
motions,
feeling where I'm like, man, I wasted a day. Like I didn't do today right. Like I just, you know what I mean? Like I just didn't make it happen. Right.
Oh, I love that. I love that.
Yeah, it's like kind of one of those weird North Stars. You're like, okay. Like if I need a litmus test, this is as good as any, I guess, right?
Yeah.
But
hey, what did I come here to do? You know, that's it.
Yeah, what am I here for?
Conversation, yeah, man.
Well, Lenerd, man, I can't tell you how much I appreciate this conversation. Yeah, I thank you for sharing time with us. We're gonna post, your contact and stuff in the show, and I love what you're doing, and just keep it up, man. I can't wait to tell people about you.
Awesome, guys. I really enjoyed the chat. Thank you for the time.